Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think everyone's like pretty much on time today. So this is the sixth in a series of seven. Originally, we were supposed to have just six, and then we added one more. So it's all about tech and architecture and geared towards the future. So far we've had speakers from IDA Tech, from Rambo, from Hassel, from M. Moser, Doxa, and then today we have Mr. Luke Tan from Zenlist. So Luke, I think you can cut me if I'm wrong, but he cut his teeth in SOM in UN Studio. He has plenty of experience overseas, and he's come back to Singapore to set up his roots, I guess. Yeah, plug down his roots. He's currently working with Lendlease under Podium. Is it
Yep.
with Podium? Yeah. So today he'll be going through with us on the topic of um exponential change, architecture for exponential change. And we know that with AI, with the recent technological advances, um, architecture field will go through quite a bit of changes. Is how we will prepare for it, future proof ourselves, get ourselves ready for what is coming. Yeah. So this session is recorded, and let's have a good session and look back on it with some good memories and learning opportunities. Thank you, Liu. On to you.
All right. Cool. Thanks, Alvin. Thanks for the introduction. Um, can I share my screen? It says that it's disabled.
I think should be fine.
Okay. I think yeah. All right. Is that working correctly? Do you see my page, the screen?
For me, it's still loading. I'm not sure for
Okay.
other people. Wait, do you see it? I don't know. For me, it just says Luke has started screen sharing, but it doesn't
Yeah,
show.
same thing. Started sharing. I haven't looked yet.
Okay. Haven't loaded yet.
Are you having two screens by any chance?
Yeah, I am. Yep.
Hmm.
Let me try again. Let's try it. Still not working, huh?
No.
Okay. Let me try one. Let me try something else this time.
Or maybe you can just share the window itself for your.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Yeah. This is good.
Okay. Okay. But you don't see it in full screen, right? You see the.
No, yeah, we see the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, wait. Sorry. Just one second. Maybe I do it the other way around. Maybe I'll. Okay, just give me a moment and try that one more time. All right. Is this working?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry about that. Um, cool. So about exponential change, the next century is gonna be feel more like 20,000 years of progress. So according to Ray Kurzweil, right, in this law of accelerating returns. So with that in mind, right, I'm going to talk today a little bit about navigating the exponentially how of the change that we are going to go through. I'll talk I'll talk about the fundamentals of technology. I'll talk about the fragmentation and the AEC, and then finally I'll end off with some tactics that we can use to navigate exponential change. And before I go in, just a little bit about myself to add on to what Elvin introduced. So I'm as a product lead in Lendlease. I spent a lot of time thinking about like the fragmentation in the architecture industry, and that's the problem that we are trying to solve really with our product. So a lot of time is spent on like understanding why the industry is the way that it is, why is it so perceived to be so backward, right, and why is it so clunky. The product that I'm working on with the team here is trying to overcome that with digital technology. And so the framework that I'm going to propose today, it guides, I think it guides how we ideate product development in Lendlease, but it also guides me as in my journey as an architect. So I hope that this is something that you can use to understand how we move on in this unstable environment. So exponential changes are reshaping the world faster than society can adapt, and strategically navigating it is key to survival and a pathway to innovation and growth. I think that's basically the idea that things are really urgent, things are changing faster than we can understand, and it's not just in the architecture industry. I think that we're trying to understand it outside of the industry, and how the world is or the conditions around architecture is also changing and acting externally on the work that we're doing. So I think that just to give a bit of definition to exponentiality, this is I think perhaps many of you are familiar with this. This is Moore's law, right? And the idea that the computing power and in relation to the size of the chip is doubling all the time, and we are close to the singularity. So Ray Kurzweil's prediction is 2045. And the singularity is when it's the event horizon, when we pass that threshold of innovation and the world changes beyond what we can imagine. So I think that there actually have been revisions on the timeline, and some people think it's closer even in 2045. I think the point is that we are close. So Moore's law is one of the principles. I think the other one is Metcalfe's law, and that is the idea that the basically is network effects, right? The more people are on a network, and the less connection, but the more value that you have. So with these two laws working in tandem, that's really how we are experiencing exponentiality. For example, example is like crypto, right? You guys were just talking about crypto and the adoption of crypto and Bitcoin. That's exponentiality that is growing because of Metcalfe's law, or any of the social media networks and all that. And I think that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen next, based on like the phenomena that we observe. Because things move so quickly, and it's really we're in a new environment, right? It hasn't happened before. So in light of like exponential change, there are really optimistic visions, right? As Ray Kurzweil's position is, he's famous for that, right? He's really optimistic. He wants to live forever. He thinks that we are when we reach a certain point with AI, we reach super intelligence, we'll have like all sorts of innovations, right? You'll be able to solve aging, for example. And so you'd have all kinds of completely new ways of living, post-human, really, right? This is what people are talking about. That's the optimistic point of view. Dystopian, some might say, right? But that in principle, that's it. But I think that on the other side of it, right, there are externalities associated with exponentiality, and one of the characteristics of our generation, younger people, right, is a sense of growing nihilism. There is the not only technology is changing, the economy is changing. You go to school for like 3 years, right, and maybe halfway through your field of study becomes obsolete, right? Or you graduate into an environment where there are no jobs, etc. So there's a growing sense of nihilism, and this is finding expression in all sorts of pathological situations. So like just every week something happens, right? And this was just last week where you had like a riot in New York at Union Square because this guy Kaisnat was giving out free PlayStations, and he couldn't anticipate the number of people that came in, right? And so that's really like network effects like materializing in the physical space, right? And it's also destabilizing and causing failures to existing systems. And I think that's that is interesting. Well, I'll bring it back to architecture, but I think that idea is interesting for us to think about. And also like with growing nihilism, we're also seeing sort of mitigative effects or mitigative efforts, right? Like a universal basic income. So it's really incredible, like how fast things have moved. Like this is not so long ago when Andrew Yang in the States, right, when he was running for office, he was proposing universal basic income, and the thesis was that AI or technological unemployment, right, would take away all the jobs, but it could generate enough revenue that you could pay people without them having to work. It's already becoming a reality today. I think it's only in the last couple of weeks in the UK where they're going to pilot. People are going to receive £2,000 a month, and they wouldn't have to work. Incidentally, that's also Sam Altman's vision, right, for OpenAI, that AI would generate the money, and so people wouldn't have to work at all in the future. You just let AI earn the money for you. And then when we're looking at existing businesses, right, and the financial system, for example, we see that recently the Silicon Valley, the failure of SVB, and a big part of it was the speed of change, right? It was over a weekend when 80% of their funds were removed from the bank, and everybody was like reacting really, really quickly because someone puts out a tweet, everyone just acts immediately. And in the financial system, money is just abstract, right? It's just a number. You can execute it immediately. In the past, this would be constrained by physical actions, right? You would have to go to a bank maybe, and then you would have to line up, and then you have to take your money out, right? But now you can do that online, and so the speed of that exchange caused a system failure. And so this is one of the prototypical failures that we are seeing now with exponentiality. And I think we will see a lot more failures of systems, right? Like the riot is one of those examples as well. I think that on the flip side of this, I think construction is interesting, and that's the field that we are in. The construction has been really slow to adapt, right? And so it's not likely we would see that sort of failure in the AEC industry very soon. And that's also correlated to the amount of digitization, right? Financial system is one of the most digitized industries in the world, and that's why the speed of technology can carry it at that speed, right? But in construction, we are very much constrained to shaping of matter. You can't really do much about giant beams, right? Or as or like concrete precast concrete shells or whatever, right? You there's not much that you can do about it because that's it's constrained to the physical properties of the media that you're working with. So that is both equally a constraint, but also or rather not a constraint. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So maybe just to wrap this part up, right? So, exponential change is Moore's law accelerated by network effects, right? We are reacting unpredictably on the cusp of a new epoch. Systems fail when they cannot keep up with the exponential speed, as we saw with like SVB and riots. However, construction is constrained by the speed and complexity of shaping matter. So when we look at the process of digitization, it's essentially a translation from the analog to digital. So in this case, I've taken cave paintings art and the written word, right, text as an example. So early ancient humans, right, you would communicate with cave paintings. It's not even text, not even language that necessarily. You would have like image. And then it progresses on to like writing. When a language develops and you write it down and you encode it, right? It is a semi-standardized, so that people can understand each other, and it's written in a standardized format, like in a book. Up to a certain point when it reaches a level of maturity, and when the technological developments arrive, right? Then you have like the processing aspect. You process that the semi-standardized text, and then you can automate it. So that's when we had the printing press. And then finally, with digitization, you are able to scale that. Previously, the printing press, you require a physical space, and you need to print it on books, etc. Right? But now with Microsoft Word or whatever we have now, right? Any word processing, it's like nothing now. We are able to scale it. One person can write a tweet, right, and then you can have millions of people read it straight away. So I think throughout this process, you can see the translation the form of the media changes a lot, right? Like you had like what would begin as art, and then it loses that until it becomes pure utility, and that's when you're writing text on the screen. And I think that's a very that's a process that's somewhat universal, that you can find this parallels in many different fields, right? So when it's highly subjective and when it's contingent before it gets encoded and automated, it still carries a lot of meaning, right? It's artistic, it's expressive, as you can see with the written manuscripts. It's a lot of decoration and stuff. But then finally, it ends up at a point where it becomes pure utility and it's just text on a screen, right? There's no meaning other than the meaning that the text itself carries, but there's no embellishment, there's no art, there's nothing. It's just pure technical function. So if we use this as a principle, I think it is illustrated very clearly in the printing press and Microsoft Word, but it happens in architecture too, and it happens actually in many different fields. So the stages of digitization, you start off with a contingent process, you go through encoding, processing, and scaling, and then you end up with a standard and universal process from art to utility. And each of these stages, there is a characteristic that's associated with it. So abstracting, centralizing, and universalizing. And these are the fundamentals of technology that I'll talk about today. And I think that by understanding these fundamentals, we would be able to at least anchor ourselves when exponential change is happening. But we are able to understand principles, or through principles, we'll be able to read what's going on. So the first abstraction, right? I think that we can understand mechanical abstraction. So non-digital abstraction in the experience of a supermarket, right? So previously, or rather, when you go to the supermarket, you can buy a slab of meat, right? Or you can buy a tomato or whatever, and you will walk through the aisle, you pick it up, and then you pay for it at the counter. In the past, right, pre-supermarket, right, you would maybe the choreography or the actions that are associated with each of these items would be like plucking a tomato from a tree or killing an animal, right? But now in a supermarket, those actions are flattened and they're actually the same sequence of movement to do the same thing. So that's already we're experiencing like meat that's abstracted from the animal, and we don't even think of the animal when we buy the meat anymore. So that's an example of like abstraction and technology, right? And in this case, the technology is supply chains, it's the retail experience, etc. Right. This is that abstraction is much more intensified when it's digital, and now that you can do everything with your phone, right? You can buy stuff on your phone. You can chat. You can communicate with your friends. You can even write an essay on your phone or whatever, right? Each of these actions had a highly physical choreography associated with it before, right? When maybe previously, if you wanted to talk to your friend, you had to go and meet your friend somewhere, or you had to call him on the telephone. That's already an abstraction. Or if you needed to write something, you'd write it with a pen, but now you can do it on your phone. And so everything has been collapsed, and you can experience the entire world by swiping your finger, right? So then you associate like all of these things with just swiping on the screen. So that's an even more intensified version of abstraction. So that's digital and mechanical abstraction. Next one is centralization. So technology also centralizes. As you can see here, right? This is just the command center in the UK, where surveillance state that allows a centralization of power, or a centralization of surveillance in this case, and that's an example of how the state uses it. But it's also centralized corporate power. So big tech, to collect all data. I think we all know, right? That that's why there are all the privacy issues, etc. But all the data is, or rather, they are centralized across states, right? They're centralized across governments, across countries. Like Google has data for people all over the world. So this is so anyway, this is a version of like a corporate power, the centralization, and then we have total power. So as you know, TikTok, right? There is the the controversy is around TikTok, working together with the Chinese government as a way to socially or culturally engineer the youth of the United States, right? As an act of war. So there's a lot of anxiety around that. I think that that's just an example. We see total power in maybe prototypical public-private partnership arrangements, right, or collaborations between government and private organizations. Yeah, then in that case, that's when both in that cooperation, right, then the power becomes total and it becomes complete with technology. And I think that's what we're seeing in the world today. We are seeing actually a lot of centralization of power across the board, across the world, right? And it's only possible through technology. So the next thing is universalization. So we went through abstraction, went through centralization, and universalization is the idea that technology is the capacity to influence everything everywhere, right? And in this case, universal choreography. So people, in the highly undeveloped or highly unurbanized parts of the world, where you wouldn't expect to have technology, right? They would also be using phones in the same way, or they interact with technology in the same way as anybody in some other city. I think it also universalizes aspirations, right? So for example, like TikTok filters or whatever, right? This is an image of Miss Korea. I don't remember when this was, but the idea, the interesting thing about this is that there were news reports about how they all look the same, right? Because they were all going to the same plastic surgeons, or if they were going to different plastic surgeons, you could tell which plastic surgeon had worked on their face because they had a certain style. So people were aspiring to be the same thing, and they were very happy to look like the same thing, right? And that's something that's a function of technology as well. It universalizes aspiration. And so this quote, Lewis Mumford, he talks about how how capitalism enters cities and transforms cities entirely. And capitalism, money, actually is a form of technology as well. And I think that this is particularly relevant in the case of Singapore, right? I think that Singapore is universalized as well, in the sense that we've been described as a generic city here in Singapore, and for a good reason, right? We are a relatively pure expression of global flows, financial, technological, etc. And that's part of Singapore's strategy, right? To be able to receive all of these, all of that resources, and let it flow through easily and quickly, and that works in its favor. So what results is actually a very anonymous urbanism. All right. So, and you would find versions of this, in different parts of the world. I think Dubai is another example. So that's universal cities. Let me just jump through that. So if we look back at the fundamentals, the three of them: abstraction, it collapses human behaviors into universal choreographies. Technological centralization confers power exceeding governments to technology companies, and universalization homogenizes culture globally and produces cities in its image. So there is a universal city, and it's distributed around the world, right? Singapore is just one of the many universal cities, or maybe all of the universal cities are Singapore. So the last bit is fragmentation. So this is the topic that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Lend-Lease. I think if you look at just this really high level timeline from ancient times to the present, you see that the master builder who was in charge of building the pyramids, or any of those ancient structures, it started to fragment into architect and engineer in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, where it became the two distinct things, right? The architects always associated with subjective qualities, and the engineers with technical and function. The Industrial Revolution brought about new complexities which required more expertise, and so it fragmented even further. And that's also when we had the invention of the elevator, right? So that's also when you had skyscrapers, and also then mechanical engineers entered the picture. With modernism, it just fragmented further, and then now you have a whole bunch of practices, right? Sustainability consultant, technologists, etc. You can, there's really a lot. I think the idea is that technology it's partial. It is technology that's been acting on cities, right? And it's not just in architecture; it's really universal. But right, as the complexity increases, then there are more expertise that is required to execute a building or whatever it is, right? And so it fragments, and then what happens after that is that you require more infrastructure to enable collaboration. So actually, it starts to get even more and more burden. And you can understand this, through the introduction of the assembly line. So, in the early industrial revolution, the assembly line was introduced. Fordism, right? First, it was comprised of task specialization, standardization, and fragmentation. Like fragmentation was actually a key feature of the assembly line. Everyone had to do a very specific thing. And you didn't have to know like what was going on beside you, right? You just needed to put that pin in the hole or whatever, and just repeat that all day, and that allowed for efficiency. That principle was generalized because it was so successful, right? It was generalized to other organizations and became a way of operating actually throughout. And this is the fragmentation, or we can trace the fragmentation of like our industry to the Industrial Revolution. The way that we experience it, right, is that when we are approaching if you look on the right, when you're approaching the practice of building or designing a building and executing it, you see a lot of like unconnected fragments, and that like maybe craft, right? It might be laying of bricks, it might be like designing, but it's detached from like engineering or the supplier, etc. They're all quite unconnected. But actually, what is going on in the meantime is that the high level upstream systems are actually generating what you observe downstream. But when we stay downstream, we don't necessarily see what's happening upstream, but we are actually slaves to it somehow, right? So I think the AEC, we are very much operating in the downstream, and that's necessarily so because we are dealing with material, right? With construction materials, with shaping matter, etc. But what's happening upstream is the economic, political, cultural forces, technology. So if you see, technology is really pushing everything upstream, and on top, above the line, everything is actually consolidating, as you saw with the fundamentals. Technology is centralizing everything and universalizing it. However, the AEC industry, we are very much tied to like physical matter. So these things resist actually providing a lot of friction against digitization, right? And therefore, we stay there. And we don't necessarily move beyond that line. So I think one thing to note about fragmentation, so this quote from Marshall McLuhan he talks about like technological amputation. So in this case, he's talking about the car. So the introduction of a car actually means that people stop walking. And when people stop walking, then cities and countries, they develop accordingly, right? So Singapore is very much automobile urbanism. But if you look at like earlier European cities, they're all actually planned around the experience of walking, right? It's not around the car. So I think that's a clear example of what he's talking about. But there are other things too, right? Like the invention of the typewriter means that you don't have to write in a penman. Your penmanship doesn't have to be so good anymore. Or the invention of a gun means that you don't have to use an arrow anymore, etc. So I think this is very important for us, I think, because it explains how we always hear about how architects are losing agency, consultants are losing agency, right? It's because as we fragment or we start to embrace new technology, we also lose control, we also lose skills. So an example of this was like DfMA, right? Like DfMA was a concept that was only introduced in 1970s to the AEC industry. It started with manufacturing. However, if you look in the past, in like history, the Industrial Revolution or even ancient history, DfMA was actually considered just part of the design work. It's by default part of the architect's job. It's only because there has been a descaling through fragmentation that we have to reintroduce that as a way to make up for that loss. So I think a lot of technologies are actually like that, right? Like you would need a collaboration platform because people have lost the ability to understand the end-to-end process, right? It's very much the same thing. So I think, yeah, we can look at like the digitization of the project delivery cycle. Basically, if it's a simplification, but you start from planning with the developer and ending with construction and the suppliers, where it's really a gradient that starts from the abstract and becomes material. When it's in the planning stage, you're dealing with finances, you're dealing with like concepts, and it doesn't have to meet the ground, right? And so then basically these are processes that are very easy to digitize, and that's why you see a lot of startups, a lot of new technologies happening around like planning and design, but less so in construction. Um, this is also how you can scale, right? It's or sorry, let me correct that. It's not that they are less so in construction, but you would have a lot more iteration and a lot more scaling when you're dealing with planning and design. Once you get to design, actually, it already starts to scaling already becomes limited because of the differences. Whenever a building meets the ground anywhere in the world, really there are a lot of different forces that are coming into play to generate that building, right? Government, local communities, technology, local culture, etc. These make the design very unique. So that means that it's not so easy to just copy and paste a building anywhere in the world. So we've been always in the industry, very often people have said like why can't architecture be like the automobile industry? I think the difference is that in a Tesla in Singapore is the same as a Tesla in China or America, but a building in Singapore is going to be drastically different from any of those contexts. So that's one of the big reasons why, right? And as you go down to like construction, you find that that's where you have low digitization and also low speed. Um, okay, so I think that you can understand like how different media might be able to travel at different speeds. Like construction, being like I said, right, low speed and really slow. So this is a diagram from McKinsey about the level of digitization of all the different sectors. And you see that right at the bottom you have hospitality, construction, and agriculture, right? And I think that. And then on top you have like ICT, which is natively digital, but you also have like finance, and service media, right? Those are very very clearly very clear how they would be digitized. I think that what is interesting to note is that hospitality, construction, and agriculture actually represent humans, materials, and nature. Right? These are actually the hardest things to digitize, and these are the things that move the slowest as well. So like. In real estate and finance, people know that like the real estate industry is actually lagging 6 months behind everything else because it's just lagging in it's just slower to react, basically, right? It's like layoffs are happening like 6 months ago, and then in tech, and then layoffs happening now in real estate. So just if we think of like the technology acting on maybe a gradient or different gradients of phenomena. So a local, global, material, abstract, tacit, explicit, right? Local being like local, material, and tacit on that edge of the gradient. That's like where that's very much the craft, right? Building stuff. That's your blue collar work as well. Global, abstract, and explicit. That's like your that's like finance, right? Or tech. Somewhere there. Basically, what's been happening in macro forest is that technology has been pushing everything upstream. So everything that used to be important, or rather the location of innovation, the location of meaning, and where the opportunities were previously were maybe much closer to the local and material. But over time, technology is pushing everything and making everything abstract, and that's where the new opportunities are, because that's where because it's centralizing all the power. So really, if you want to shape a city now, it's like you don't really do a master plan maybe like that IMP did, right? You maybe might be more effective in like designing the technology behind how policies are created or something like that, right? You are actually the forces that are acting on cities are actually changing. So I think that you can understand like these two realities right now. Because of exponential change, we're seeing them diverge, and they're becoming more and more polarized. So where you had the local and the material tacit, that's like you can understand that as human, and then whereas global, abstract, and explicit, you can understand as non-human. And these two human, non-human categories, they actually have spatial expressions. And I'll give you an example of that, right? So this is one of many ghost cities in China. And in and these ghost cities are famously they are material expressions, right, that are ostensibly residential apartments, which they don't really function as residential apartments. They are just like material expressions of like or material stores of value, right? They're just a different form of money, and that's why nobody lives in them, because they've served their function as a exchange medium of exchange. This is an extreme example, right? The cities were never meant for people to live in, right? But you can imagine how that you can see, like hints of that, right, in Singapore as well. So like I think that the Chinese extreme, that's really good example of non-human space, but I think that we exist along a gradient, right? So we see that in Singapore, you see a lot of repetition, and understandably so, right? Because it's we have to deliver for immediate goals. But what happens to the industry is that it's commoditized. It's become really utilitarian. So remember that diagram where I showed like from art to utility, right? I think that in Singapore, when it comes to like delivering a lot of buildings is really very much in the utility spectrum. So you don't expect to do like any art, right, in your buildings. In many cases in Singapore, you just fulfill that function. What that has done is that it's reduced it to very anonymous structures, and the value that the architect can bring to the process becomes very small, right? All you need to do is just fulfill that function, and beyond that, any subjectivity is like it's not going to be it's not integral. It's you should actually remove it. It works better that way. So what has happened is that if you look at buildings of the past in Singapore, like Golden Mile, right? That's a really interesting building, and actually very experimental for Singapore. Before all the regulations were built up, before all the forces were acting on Singapore, there was a space for innovation in architecture. But that's not just Singapore; it was a generational thing as well, right? The boomer generation, they had very different kinds of opportunities. In that at that time, architecture still had the capacity to carry meaning, right? Culture, meaning, and ideas, right? Subjectivity could still be carried by architecture, but because it has been technology has acted on them and has become more and more commoditized. Regulations, and I mean government and regulations as a form of technology as well, and then architecture loses the capacity to carry meaning, at least in this context. And so meaning goes elsewhere, right? Like if you want to do anything interesting in Singapore, like maybe don't be an architect, right? I hear that sometimes, right? Maybe you should go and be, I don't know, go and join a startup, or go and be a chef, right? Because food is actually really creative in Singapore, because that's where these are the carriers of meaning these days. I think that also what it has done is that it's turned Singapore into into a non-place, right? Singapore is a hotel or an airport. Not for many of us who are locals, but for a majority, for many people, right? The experience of Singapore is just a hotel, and it could be anywhere in the world. The only difference is maybe the weather, or certain small things, but it could be very similar anywhere else. So I think that one way to think about where the architect fits into this space is like what I'm calling proto architecture really is like what I'm trying to get at is like what is a new form of practice, right? Is there a way that we can evolve to it? How do we adapt, right? Because that's what it's about, like with this change upon us. What's the next where's the opportunity for us? I think it depends. Of course, it depends on what the individual aspires to. Some people have many different kinds of architects, but I think that we sit somewhere along. We still sit very close to the left, right? The material and the tacit, etc. We sit very far on the left, but then we also see like prototypical architects moving upstream. So it's diverse. You have upstream architects, you have downstream architects. Downstream architects are like many of us, right? That are doing interiors, doing pavilions, going really deep into fabrication and doing really interesting structures, but never moving beyond the scale. And maybe the time has not yet come, but it's been very difficult for small practices around the world, not just in Singapore. And then on the other hand, you have like the people that have been moving upstream. And so a proto architect would be like Cedric Price, for example, right? So he's a very good example, I think, where he's like predominantly concerned with systems, organization behind buildings rather than the building themselves. A modern day interpretation might be a software architect. It might be entrepreneurs who are innovating business models, right? Basically, what these people working on the upstream are trying to work with the forces behind the shaping of cities rather than working with the form of the city on its own. right? And so we sit somewhere in between. I think, but to draw us back to like what is architecture? I think I don't know, but for me, well, you're right. But for me, when I studied architecture and I wanted to be an architect, it's really because I love space, experience, aesthetics, etc. Right? And so Louis Kahn, so quote here, I think that actually is very much more relevant today, right? A great building must begin with the unmeasurable, go through the measurable, and in the end must be unmeasurable again, right? What he's really saying is like he's celebrating the subjectivity of a building, the cultural expression of the building. If it's measurable, it's engineered, it's technical, right? And that's basically most buildings that we see that are not particularly interesting. They just meet technical requirements, but really the greatness of a design and of a building is in the subjective quality of it. So I think that if we look at the architectural profession as it is, I think we are stewards of culture. At least that's traditionally so. Like if you look at what Louis Kahn said, right? Like we are supposed to be producers of culture and makers of meaning. But I think that's also forgotten somewhat. I think we are also overburdened by increasing complexity of urbanization. So the profession has fragmented, and there's so many different practices within the same term architect that the term itself has to cover so much more than what it means to be architect. It is far more complex than what it means to be architect before, right? But as a result, we lose a lot of agency. So I think that finally, I think we're constrained by ossified traditional and regulatory boundaries. So the definition of an architect and the traditional professional boundaries, when it was set up in the 1970s by the RIBA or ARB, hasn't really changed very much, right? And this, both a good and a bad thing, is preserve the profession and maintain the quality and respectability. But it also has prevented many people. I think it's prevented the profession from evolving and adapting to the change, right? Exponential change. I think that so this quote, irreducible core value exists around human interaction. I think basically what David Matten here, he's a futurist. What he's saying is that some things about us will never change. Human nature and the need to interact, the need to experience, the aesthetic experience, right? That's something that people will always crave, and that's something that will always be very important to society. Even if the world changes and AI changes everything. So I think that's a principle to remember. In the age of AI, right? I think you will, based on the three fundamentals that I explained earlier, right? You're going to see much more intensified versions of that. So, for example, now with AI, you can conceive of buildings without actually understanding or having to care about the material behind it, etc. Right? So we're actually conceiving of like spaces without completely in the abstract of the physical. And I think that now it's it's still fairly innocuous, right? I think you could see that I could see that abstraction carrying on, and then it will become we'll be even more detached from like the physical reality, which I mean it leads to possibilities for innovation, but it also has pathological consequences, and you'll see a lot of failures necessarily, and maybe we would adapt, but it's a new reality as well. Okay, I'm going to jump to this. I know that don't want to go over time. So, and now we know, as we saw, abstracting, universalizing, and centralizing, we're going to see hyper-centralization of governments or of like ruling powers, really. And I think that what we might see is like cities that will become partially or fully autonomous. So, I think one of the things that might happen is like you might see HDB become run by an AI, right? I mean, and that autonomously generates buildings. I don't think it's that far off, and the trend is such that it is leading in that direction. So I mean that's just a version of the another version of the reality, and then you have like AI agents. Like a lot of people are looking into creating agents replacing like SMEs, any subject matter expert. You're going to see agents for like doctors, agent nurses, agent architects, right? Agent lawyers, and so you very quickly you can see how a lot of processes around this will become autonomous. So I think maybe almost closing up, right? This quote from Zygmunt Bauman on liquid modernity. There are no permanent bonds, and any of them that we take up for a time must be tied loosely so they can be untied again. Because when circumstances change, they will then we can adapt quickly. So basically, the idea is that we should always be ready to unlearn, right? Unlearn and reinvent. And I think that this is, even though it's written in 2000, is never more relevant today. So based on the fundamentals of abstraction, I propose a few tactics, and I don't really know, right? These are just like conjecture, but it's based on my experience working overseas and coming back to Singapore, landing in time for the collapse of society, and also working in like a product development, thinking about these all day. I think that the first thing is to understand upstream and downstream processes, and then to commit to an approach. So I think for me previously, right, I was very constrained to the practice of design. But I think that I more and more I see the importance of overcoming that fragmentation and the task specialization to understand the entire process. How does a brick that is laid on the ground as a first piece of a building relate to the political systems that are running the city, right? If you understand that, then you can identify new opportunities, and you can also identify new operative domains. So where is your site for intervention? Maybe your project is no longer the building, but your project is somewhere upstream as an entrepreneur with the private sector, or maybe in policy. You still design buildings, but you design the systems for it. That's the upstream version. But if you want to, that you can commit to that version, or you can commit to a downstream version, right? And then you get really good at manufacturing and craft, and there is a market for that as well, right? But if we stay in between, I think it's going to get harder and harder for architects. I think that the next thing that we might want to do is to innovate beyond professional boundaries and existing business models. So, as I said, right, the current traditional notion of the architect is pretty old. It's old and hasn't been able to adapt to change. And so is his business model. So how can we think that? I don't really know. I think the profession in general is slow. We probably need a period of experimentation and failure, and then we would see new models stabilize. But I think maybe for us who really inspired to do architecture because of design is that I think we need to celebrate subjectivity and create meaning for people. So like when we design, we have to really I think that's where the value is really, right? If we don't add value in that area, then we might as well be automated, because that's literally what the product that we're building here at Lenny's is automating the design of buildings, and is a subjective part that we can't automate. But everything else, it's possible. And maybe to close, right? I think this quote from Victor Papanek is also particularly powerful. Like, the only important thing about design is how it relates to people, not finance, not politics, but like literally how it's being used by people. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liu. I think first off, before we go to the question segment, maybe you'd like to like wave your hands to turn on the light in your office. I noticed that. I think it has automatically turned it
It
off.
switched off. Oh my, you have to give me about, maybe you keep talking. I have to find the switch. I don't know where it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
please.
sometimes smart technology isn't that smart after all. Okay. So we do have a few questions. Thank you, everyone in the audience for your questions. Keep it coming. We will try to answer everybody's questions as much as possible. Okay, yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Liu. Okay, so we do have a few questions. I think not much overlap. It was quite a long journey to get to on the background of abstraction and everything to kind of like build up how we will understand what you were covering later on, which
Yeah.
was slightly more specific in terms of architecture and architectural practice and relevance, basically existential crisis, basically, right?
Hmm.
So that we'll go to the I'm trying to arrange the questions in order. So
Sure,
maybe
yeah.
we'll just go to the first one. More specific as to how your experience, let's say from UN Studio, from SOM, from academia, you taught for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and most recently in Landly's Podium. How and I guess maybe your latest venture in Podium would be more relevant.
Yeah.
How is Podium solving these challenges as an architect? Um, yeah, and maybe how have you seen the this change in the industry evolving through your years in the practice and everything? Yeah, how is the
Yeah.
industry working together on this?
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'll start with how it's changed and my experience globally, and then I'll land with like Lend-Lease specifically. I think that I graduated in 2013 into like the post 2008 environment, right? So we were riding the China wave, but it was a very abnormal. I think it was a very abnormal time in history. I think when I was studying, in the early 2000s, this was also so it was also a bubble, right? I mean, basically, like until now, it's been really, really abnormal. So you saw a lot of like very different types of firms that were coming up. Like not so long ago, it was fairly common to see very small firms, small practices that were practicing globally, right? They just do design and you can build like anywhere, all different parts of the world, mostly China or the Middle East. That sort of practice has really declined. You don't really see that really anymore, and it's very much to do with like the economic change. So I think that's one thing. Like the economy really drives like business, like how business is done. Really, or rather, it has really driven the change in the practice of architecture and architecture's business models. That's fairly global, I think. I working across different contexts is that working in Europe, working in the US, and in Singapore, they're all radically different from each other. Every you as an architect, you are just a part of a much bigger system, and really, I think that's true for anything you do. But maybe the experience of that is that in Europe, it was a fairly, I worked in Amsterdam, right? I worked in Amsterdam, so it was very, very liberal. There was the experience of it, right? The experience of the government was that it was very small, but we were also working on global projects, so it's quite different. One of the big projects I worked on was in the Middle East, and basically we could do anything you wanted, and executing it was actually fairly easy because it had a totalitarian government, right? They just do everything and they execute everything, and no one says anything, to oppose it. Um, in America, if I'm working on local projects in America, it's a highly fragmented process because it's democratic. So every design move that you make, you need to talk to a whole bunch of stakeholders, and it takes a really long time, but it ensures that everybody has a say in it, right? So the city in Saudi Arabia belongs to the government, to the monarchy, but the city in America belongs to the people, right? So I think that's very different, and I think in Singapore it's a mix of the two, right? I mean, it's a lot more Saudi Arabia than America, I think, but there is a lot of like regulation that you have to deal with, and that's also similar to in America, but it's for different reasons. Anyway, how it has changed is that for like basically, I think maybe a lot of you probably observe as well that architecture has become a lot less ambitious, right? It's been a lot. I mean, maybe with the exception of like the line, but not so long ago we were still trying to solve double curvature with like and the tessellation on that, and that was like a big thing, right? It's like nobody's going to do that now. Because the economy is in trouble, right? So architecture, there's the new pragmatism. I think that's emerging. I think that how I see in Singapore the opportunity for us, like as Singaporeans, right, is that because we are one of the most vertically integrated governments in the world, we have the capacity to execute the way that Saudi Arabia does. But we also have the liberal economy, like in the US, right? So we have an advantage for both, from their point of view. And Lend-Lease kind of works as like a private, we work in between the public and the private sector, I would say. And I think that the way that we've been trying to solve it is to work with like government agencies and work with their, and as mentioned, right, Singapore government agencies are very vertically integrated, so we are actually very close to productizing a lot of stuff that Singapore agencies do. We can actually build a repetition. As you saw, Singapore's buildings can be very repetitive, right? So why not? It's not far off from being productized. So that's what we're trying to do. We're building digital tools to automate the process, to help other people collaborate in order to deliver deliver buildings in a very integrated and coherent way.
Do you have any more specific, like a recent project that you can share about?
From Lemmy's?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, well, I don't. It's not a project. We're building a product. What I suggest maybe is if anybody wants, just reach out. I'm happy to give you a demo. Yeah, I wasn't prepared to do a demo today, but I think you can go on the website. There might be some content there as well. Yeah, but please reach out. Like I'm happy to let's chat and then I'll do a demo.
Or like walk us through a process, because I mean we are hearing product, but I'm not sure many of us in the audience actually knows what product we are kind of like talking about. Is it a software product? Is it a
Right. I see. Well, it's a digital product, right? So we are building a digital product for design automation. So it's based in the cloud. You log in, and then you choose a site. You are able to place buildings on a site, and then you are able to resolve the structural engineering for the buildings as well. And then you'll be able to connect to suppliers to make sure that their components are instantiated inside the building that you've designed. And then you're able to also export that as an IFC file that's compliant to Coordinate X. That's the ambition. That's currently kind of like the type of features that we have. It's a 3D view, and then you can interact with it like you would a 3D software.
So how would you say this fits into the context of fragmentation? Like you are bringing Lendlease as the developer, which is typically the top line.
Mm,
You are kind of like integrating yourself downwards
yeah.
in that
I think
sense.
that's yeah, that's right. I mean, that's right. Yeah. So we are working with. That's why we work with. We're not a startup that's trying to go broad. So there is a model where you would want to go for a broad market. I think in our case, the path that we've chosen is to do to go deep. So working with like established integrated companies like Lendlease ourselves, right, or with any of the many government agencies that are all like integrated. So we want to work with them to build for them very very how do you say customize the product for them, like and make sure and help the organization to integrate through our product, and with the idea that they can build at scale, so we don't have to scale.
So this is for projects that Lendlease is also not involved in. Like you just give them that software. They do that kind of like, I'll say maybe Feezy. Does it go beyond Feezy and downline into design and construction?
Yeah, it goes beyond. It goes into right now. It goes into like almost schematic. We're trying to get it to schematic, and then but the ambition is to bring it all the way to the end, all the way to supply.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. If you have any specifics, maybe you can just guide us on how it is. But I understand because Podium itself is quite a new initiative, right?
Well, yeah, it's not that hasn't been around that long. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think hold on. Does this okay to the guys in the audience, and the girls? I'm not sure whether this sufficiently answers your questions. You can type in the chat, yes, no, maybe so. Try out any questions. But I think from what I get from you, this seems to be a front end kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't. I mean, I
no
wasn't
worries.
prepared for that. But please, maybe leave your contact. I'm happy to organize a demo, like maybe just like that for the same crowd here. We can do that. If you like, right? If there's any interest, let me know. I can do it.
Hmm. Okay, hold on.
Um,
Let me look through. I think one other question just came in. So hold on. Okay, so there's one question about Singapore Pavilion at Venice Biennale.
mhm.
I don't know whether you're familiar with this year's edition.
Not really. Yeah.
Okay, so or anyone else in the audience, maybe you visited it, you read about it. Okay, so anyway, this year's edition was on um measuring intangibles of a city. if I'm not wrong. Led by the current president of SIA, Singapore Institute of Architects, which is actually the host of today's session. I did not introduce SIA. Okay, anyway, yeah, free plug. Singapore Institute of Architects organized this series of sessions. Myself and Wen Wei are just part of the team that organizes these sessions. We are trying to help the architecture profession to evolve. Yes. Okay. So that is a plug for SIA. I'm sorry, Julia. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, this year's edition on Venice Biennale was on intangible. So I think when you shared the quote by Louis Kahn,
Yep.
architecture is on the measurable, and then the immeasurable, and then the measurable. So I think going back to that, it kind of links up on what is the meaning of a city today, right? I mean, we started with all these metrics on like construction and all these kind of things. We know it's a 5-minute city. You have 20 MRT stops within a certain radius or something like that. But in the end, going back to this year's one, we are still at odds trying to find out how the hell we can measure a city, and how, in a sense, understand what makes Singapore Singapore, right? Yeah, I'm just talking about it because I don't really know if anyone has the answer of it. So, but if what do you think about that?
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. I'm sorry. I don't really know the exhibition, but maybe I'll speak to the description, right? I think that's I think that that's great that there is effort to understand the immeasurable, because I think that's where, I mean, the hard part is like, how do you translate that into value, right? How do you charge for that? Who's going to pay for that? Nobody's going to pay for that if it looks nicer necessarily, if it doesn't yield a financial return. I think that's a good effort in a way. I suppose that the reverse is also true, right? Like, if you can measure it, then it loses its subjective value, right? Because it's no longer subjective, and in fact, it might actually pervert it, right? Typically, what happens is that when you impose like and that's what we found, right? The AI alignment problem is literally the same thing. If you optimize an AI to save nature or whatever, right? Or what's the paperclip problem? I don't remember. But anyway, it might end up like realizing that humans should be killed, right? But they're optimizing for that goal, right? Actually, it's the same thing for any metrics that we impose on our designs, right? That you can optimize for a certain thing, but you realize that maybe actually that goes to an extreme and completely destroys the design. And I'm not saying that measuring subjectivity will do that, but I think that when you start to try to measure it, then and you try to optimize for immeasurable qualities, then you might run into those problems.
Okay, so I think we hold that thought. I think on running into problems with the what is traditionally feasible, combining feasible and unfeasible, and what is financially workable, because we know that in the end it's really down to dollars and cents, unless you just build for yourself, right? And you're a rich man, you don't really care. But yeah, like slipped my mind. Phil, that American architect who died at 97 years of age, Phil, who just built in his backyard. Like, I can't remember. Philip, is it? Oh, but anyway, yeah. So okay, so I think we have 2 more questions. I don't think I missed out anyone. So any more questions, just throw it in. We will be going back to land lease, and then we'll end off with one last question, which I think actually applies to a lot of youngsters today in the profession. So back to land lease will be kind of like, what do you think is land lease's edge in terms of this product that you are building? Have you seen how it really benefits the whole construction process, as opposed to maybe your past experiences where you didn't have this product? And what other challenges do you face on a day-to-day basis?
Right. I think that, so yeah, I think Lendlease's edge, right, is that we're probably the most vertically integrated real estate company in the world. and we're in the most vertically integrated government in the world, right? Or we're living with the most vertically integrated. And I think that's the advantage, and that's actually an unfair advantage that we have as Singaporeans, right? That's the unique advantage that we have, and I know that it's I think it can be very difficult to work with, right? But there are opportunities there. In the context of like Lend-Lease, back to Lend-Lease, is that I think that having that, being able to operate at scale means that we don't have to build products at scale, right? We build products for people with scale. I think that's very key, because if you look across the board, startups in the same space, they never scale, and for good reason, right? Like, because as I mentioned in the talk, right, is that in construction you are tied to the process of shaping matter. The construction process is not digitizable anytime soon, right? Because it's dealing with physical materials. And when it comes down to that, that is okay. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that it's highly specific and highly local. So you can build algorithms to generate a building in Singapore, but it most definitely will not work in somewhere else. First of all, especially if it's a different type of building, right? A residential versus a industrial versus a commercial. These all require drastically different. There will be all sorts of edge conditions that you have to account for. So this is the reason why we've found that it's just scaling the product doesn't seem to make so much sense, and at least for us, right? For us, it doesn't make so much sense, and it makes more sense to leverage our unfair advantage, which is with vertical integration, and build for people with skill.
Okay, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on vertical integration?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like if you look at, so Lend-Lease has investment, has development, has construction as well. And it's all in the same company, right? They do everything from end to end. That's what I mean by vertical integration. So a lot of collaboration platforms try to solve the communication, collaboration between stakeholders. That's a really big part of the problem, actually, right? The fragmentation. But because we are vertically integrated, you've already overcome like a lot of that fragmentation. You're all sitting under the same roof. So that's what I mean. And I think that, so when I mean that, that's in Lend-Lease. But if you look at like JTC or something, right? They have actually very similar functions. It might not be vertically integrated all the way, but they can make a lot of decisions like on their own. But if you're like a private developer and you're smaller, you're going to end up having to work with the fragmented process, right? You have to find other people, find other consultants, find whatever.
All right, so I guess to summarize it for the members in the audience, the investors are talking directly to the people who are going to manage the construction to hit the KPIs. So this building, they are targeting X amount of returns in how many years, so and so forth, who are also in direct contact with the people who are managing the product that Luke is part of, which is the digitization, feasibility, talking to architects. So you keep as much of the processes within the same house. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Defragmentation in a sense. Yeah.
Yes. And then maybe the question about what's the challenge, right? What was that?
Yeah,
Challenge people
challenges on a
today, right?
day-to-day basis.
I think it's dealing with exponential change, actually, right? Like, will AI disrupt our product? I think that's a problem. But I think that a lot of problems we face are not technological. Fragmentation is not necessarily technological, or people problems are not technological. So sometimes a product cannot solve those things, right? It's a different problem altogether. So I think it's many versions of these problems that I face. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Just to cut in, not relatedly, but to Rohan or whoever else is interested, I was talking about Philip Johnson, rich guy, huge backyard. He builds whatever he wants, and because of that, he had the freedom of expression. So you can check out Brick House, Glass House. Yeah. Okay. So last question will be more of back to the architectural profession as a whole. I think this year especially, we've seen a whole lot of brain drain from the industry, myself included.
Mm.
Not that I'm saying I'm very brainy. Yeah, but I mean I left. Because there is a mismatch between work-life balance, remuneration, and also I think lately what it actually means to be an architect. The traditional architect, we're taught in school yada yada yada. We come out, we don't see that we are making any impact in the world, and then people start to leave. So, do you view the traditional architect as a dying role, sandwiched between all parties, having little to no agency for creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, unfortunately, like I'm fully committed to being an architect. Like, even though I I I I chose to do architecture because I love doing it, right? So I'm not coming from it from a cynical point of view at all. I think that but I think that and I think that the challenges that we face. So like I said, right? I think when so the concept of like descaling is very important, I think, in our industry. Like, when people stop drafting when they had CAD, people stop doing drawings when you have Revit, people stop and then now maybe people stop designing as much because they have AI, right? And then every time we rely on a new tool, we lose something that made the profession, like, the essence, that what essentially it was, right? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing in and of itself. I think that there must be innovation. Uh, but I think that we are also constrained by professional boundaries. So, the traditional definition of an architect and what an architect must be, right, is still very much maybe a 1970s conception. And maybe there is maybe we can find expression and creativity in other parts of the or maybe along the edges of the profession, right? So in short, I think that the notion of the architect right now, I feel like it's dying. Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with technology, but actually maybe it's more to do with the economy. And I don't know if it's going to die. It's going to be like that all the time. I don't know, but a lot of my peers have left the industry. Yeah, basically, and basically, all my peers who are not in America or in Europe have left. So everyone in Asia has left. And I think but I think that's more to do with the economy. I feel like, but as a whole, I think that, as government gets bigger, regulations increase, and like, I mean, even like, yeah, regulations and technology as well, right? As it increases, you start to see more constraints put on architecture. For example, right, like Revit, right? I think now very often what I found is that people, or I am very tempted to design for Revit. Right, it's you design something that's easy to build in Revit, right, rather than design something that's actually for a quality space, right? I think whenever we do that, as tempting as it may be, right, is that we are losing the opportunity to add value, to add something special to the architecture that we do, and when we have more like, so Revit is an example of a technological constraint, but you have also regulations. So like now, sometimes you might find that everything's been regulated out and there's no more design. So the value that you can add as a designer becomes less and less, because the value you can add is really like the experimentation and the but it's also the market, right? The market doesn't have the tolerance for that, so it's very unforgiving, especially in Singapore. So I think for that reason, I foresee that it's going to get tougher and tougher in Singapore. I think that also another indicator is how NUS, right, the architecture now is now part of engineering school, right? So it feels like architecture is really becoming more of an engineering effort in Singapore. I think it's because of these things, right? I think it's very unfortunate. But yeah, so I mean, and hence, I'm suggesting maybe, I don't know. I'm thinking, and this is advice to myself. I really don't know, and I don't claim to know it more than anybody else. But I feel like I'm personally looking for opportunities to innovate along the edges of architecture to change this, right?
I think personally, I just feel the more things change, the more things stay the same.
Mhm.
As things get more and more AI, more and more boring, people do start to look for things that are more original.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think when Pruitt Ego failed in America,
Mhm.
people were saying what death of modernism and everything, but no, it just didn't work in America. It works in Singapore.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah,
HDB works in Singapore.
yeah.
But I do see that kind of death of modernism because of the AI revolution. That
Mm.
then everything just starts to be nice, nice and same. And because of that, nothing becomes nice. If everything is nice, nothing is nice. So then the role of the
Yeah.
architect will evolve. What is the next nice kind of thing?
Actually, that's a yeah. I'm sorry. That's a really good point, right? Because like progress is uneven, right? So maybe if you go to India, there's still a lot of opportunities there. Or Vietnam, right? They're still like advancing, they're still developing, they're moving up the value chain. So still fairly unregulated, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe just to answer the audience question, I just feel that maybe the numbers of traditional architects just may not need to be as much as they were before, but I would think there is a lot more opportunity elsewhere for the skills of an architect to kind of like look beyond what we consider a traditional practitioner. There are so SIA, we also host a lot of events. We bring in a lot of people who have done things outside of architecture. They had an architecture background. Some of them are still practicing, but they do a lot of other things. Humanitarian, some of them go into aquarium design, some of them a lot of things require an architectural skills, things that we are taught in school because it's a very robust education. Okay, so last question from the audience. It's approaching 9. Back to your land lease experience. Who do you think are your direct competitors in terms of the product you are developing?
I think that I think so. I think that there are two facets to it. So, and it depends on the sequence. We are building this product over 2 years. We are aiming to achieve our targets in 2 years. We are working with design automation, right? And we're trying to automate the process. So, in the feasibility study stage, we're always looking out on like what Giraffe, Forma, in Singapore, DBF, right? What these guys are doing. I think that's competition. Although it's not direct in that the business model is quite different. But they are trying to achieve something similar in the short term. But over the long term, we are actually maybe closer to a mix between a CDE and a design automation tool. So a CDE, like a common data environment. So I wouldn't necessarily call the CDEs like direct competition, but there is an overlap there, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Honestly, I don't really know what other competitors, so I can't say much. I don't know how to compare this question. But
Yeah, well, I didn't show you guys
yeah,
the tool, so I should do that first, and then yeah.
yeah. I mean, I hope it sufficiently answers your question. If you are asking and you still don't really feel that the answer is okay, maybe you can just type out in the chat some tools that you've heard of, so that everyone in the audience can maybe just look it up. And yeah, it's a sharing session. Then we can just look it up for ourselves. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground today. We covered from big to small, macro to micro, and past to future. Okay, there is a hand up from Hui. Is there? Oh, there is no longer a hand up from Hui. In fact, okay, yeah. Okay, so I think we'll call it a day here. It is. I hope everybody has had their dinner or will be going for their dinner. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Luke, for your time and your effort and everything that you have brought to the table. SIA, we will continue to hold many of these events, really to evolve the profession from the ground up, from the youngsters, to such so that in the next 10 years we'll look back on this and say, hey, this was a catalyst for something bigger in the industry. Yeah. So Luke has kindly shared his LinkedIn in the chat. Feel free to reach out to him for a personal
Yeah.
demo of what Lendlease is capable of, what Podium is designed for. Yeah. So if anyone else has no questions, thank you SIA for hosting the session. Thank you Wenwei for organizing, and thank you Luke once again for your time and your effort.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you everyone. Please feel free to exit the Zoom now.